we believe if you're going to do it, the audit should be worth it. The problem is, audits are hard. Yet we've issued over 20,000 reports to 2,000 clients worldwide.
One of the clearest answers that you could walk away probably from this podcast is keeping something forever is probably the wrong data retention period. It's almost always going to be unsuccessful.
Cybersecurity and compliance will no longer be a mystery.
Well, welcome everybody into our cybersecurity mission. My name is Allie Krings. I'm your host, and today we're going to be talking about some critical components of data governance and protection. It's all about data use, retention, and disposal. So to break it all down, I'm thrilled to have Mark Heinle joining us. He's Vice President, Privacy Assurance Services here at KirkpatrickPrice. Mark, thanks so much for joining me.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So before we dive into data use, retention, and disposal, I want to know more about you, and I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about your background and your experience.
Sure. So I'm an attorney, been an attorney and a member of the Florida Bar for 18 years. And I went into law school knowing that I wanted the benefits of law school, but I didn't necessarily know if I wanted to practice traditional, litigation or contract law. And I found in law school and afterwards that I really enjoyed helping states and governments write good laws that would prevent litigation, and then helping organizations understand those laws to prevent litigation. And so
did you ever think in law school that you were going to end up at a cybersecurity firm?
No, I did not. I didn't even know. When I was in law school was right about the time that, SOC 2 auditing and SSE 16 and all that stuff was starting to take off, but I had never heard of it. I knew what the internet was and, what a password was, but this was not, I didn't know it was an industry. I didn't know it was a service that could be provided. I had no idea.
Okay, well, before we keep going, I know everybody's going to want to know on this call, if we get in trouble with the law, can we call you or can you help us at all?
On this call, I'm probably a witness, and so I might not be able to represent us. We would need another attorney to help us out, because I would be in trouble. I have to disclose all the kinds of stuff that we attorneys usually get to keep secret.
Oh man. Okay. Well, I really shot myself in the foot on that one, but
no, it's all right. Otherwise I would gladly offer, but now I think we're in the same boat.
Sorry, everybody. We're going to have to find our own lawyers out there, but
that's right.
Mark, when we started kind of our cybersecurity mission, the whole idea behind this was to break down the barriers that can be overwhelming and thick in description for everybody who wants to do better for their organization and for their business. So we did kind of cast a wide net at KirkpatrickPrice, and we said, what topics are you interested in? What should we talk about? And you were actually the one who said, let's talk data use, retention, and disposal. So I first want to know why you selected this topic of anything.
So, I think that there is an ethical obligation for any organization to respect the privacy of personal data. We happen to provide that as a service, but I care about that topic even if it wasn't my job. In a digital age where you're exchanging personal data with an organization, almost nonstop, there's so many opportunities for misuse and unethical behavior. And the premise of data privacy is that our personal data is like property. It's like our home. It's special and it belongs to us. And so that using that property requires transparency and consent to use it. And so I thought, this is a topic that probably sounds as dry as it can be, and maybe I can help people understand why it's important, both for their organization, but also at a personal level. And I think that would be a success. But even more, in my experience, organizations tend to get better compliance results when they understand why something is important, instead of just understanding sort of the steps to do it right.
Yeah.
If they don't understand why they're trying to take a certain action, they tend to not get buy-in for people, resources, energy, money, all the things that are needed to secure and respect data privacy.
Before we get into the why, can you explain the what? What is it so that we all have the same foundation moving forward in this discussion?
Yeah, so data use is probably one of the broadest terms that you could have in a data privacy or security context. GDPR uses the phrase data processing activity, and it means anything you do with personal information. That could be access it, it could be store it, it could be combine it, it could be transmit it. If you can put a verb in front of it, that's data use. So
Okay.
if you're collecting personal information to sell a good or a service, that's probably the most common scenario that people would think of. If you're providing or collecting personal information for healthcare services or education, or to get your car fixed, or to sign up for a library card, or to pay your taxes, any aspect of daily life where your name, your email address, your physical address, those types of data elements are being used in some way, that's what data use means. It's the way that we take the information we get from people and provide them some kind of good or service in the end.
Okay. And what about retention and disposal? What does that have to do with data use?
So once you have data, now you have to decide how long you're going to keep it and how you get rid of it. So how long you keep it is retention. And so we could talk a little bit about the historical view of how data should be retained and kind of the newer view, which makes things a little bit challenging. And disposal might seem like an easy topic, but as we move away from paper, if we were just talking about paper, I could tell you that just throwing a bunch of hospital records into a public trash can would not be secure disposal. But in most cases now, people don't have that amount of paper. It's digital destruction, and that can look a lot different. And in some cases, it might not actually be destruction or disposal at all, even when we think it's occurred. And so it can get a little bit tricky.
Interesting. So when it comes to that disposal, what do you mean the difference between disposal and destruction?
Yeah, so it's easier to understand the physical destruction of a hard drive or a thumb drive or a laptop. It's a little bit harder to ensure and understand the disposal of data digitally within an application, within a database or a server. And in most cases, organizations are not going to destroy laptops just so that they can delete personal data. And in fact, that wouldn't even accomplish the purpose. If it was just a laptop and there was a server somewhere, a database that had all the personal data, the destruction of the laptop wouldn't even accomplish the requirement to eliminate data when you no longer need it. So that's where we come into, digitally, how do we remove, if it's my name or your name out of an application, if we've either requested deletion or there's a law that says time's up, or the company policy says that it's time's up, or maybe we're no longer customers of that company, and since we're not customers anymore. And so there's a couple different options. There are, you can actually delete the information, can remove it so that it's gone. There is no trace. Allie's name isn't there anymore. Another option, which creates a little bit of a risk but can be easier to accomplish, is to de-identify or anonymize data. So instead of Allie Krings, it's AK. And so your line in the system could still be there with, instead of 123 Main Street, New York, it might just be New York. And so the amount of identifiers is reduced so that instead of being able to tell that it's you, we just know that it's a person who lived in a state or maybe a city and that purchased a product. And that might get us to that might satisfy the deletion requirements, which without us having to actually remove everything about the interaction that you had with an organization. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it's really helpful. I think about, all the apps in the past that I've signed up for. Maybe, when I was getting married, I had an app that I would use that would track the photographer and make sure that I had ordered the cake and all of this kind of stuff, where of course they had my information, my name, the wedding date of the event, the address of the event, and there's a lot of stuff there. When you're moving on, like my wedding's over, it was a few years ago, right? Is it good enough to just delete the app as a user, or what should a user do to kind of save their own information?
It's a good question. The high likelihood is that an organization is not going to delete that information on their own. They will retain that as long as they can. You may have heard the phrase, if an application is free, then your info is the product. They're using your information, whether maliciously or innocently or transparently. They might tell you that they're going to sell your data or share it with other wedding vendors who could market to you. But once you're no longer in the need of wedding vendors, there still might be value in having trends to say how many weddings use this photographer or this videographer or this location, and what do those people what other services do they tend to like, so that they could customize their marketing to other people. Oh, you're going to use this venue. 75% of the brides that use this venue also use this caterer. And so they might think that's fine, but you're not there. You don't need the caterer anymore. And so it's likely going to require you to ask them directly to delete your data. Now, if you're in the US, you may be in a state where your state law does not provide you with the right to have your data deleted. If you were in California, that's the first state that had that kind of data subject rights laws. We're up to near, I think, 20 states now at the time of this recording, where there are at least a few states' rights for data privacy. But you can ask. Sometimes organizations voluntarily give that right to you to delete your data if you request it. And if they make that promise, regardless of what state they're in, they're supposed to keep that promise, or they could be subject to fines from the Federal Trade Commission.
Okay, well, just as a reference to anybody who's looking for my wedding information, I believe my registry is still active. It's okay if you want to send a late gift. So just putting it out there.
There you go. Sometimes deletion is useful, and sometimes retention has its own value. You got to weigh those pros and cons, right?
I love that. So, as we're talking all about these methods of disposal and destruction and why we would want to do it, can you give us the flip side of this and maybe the examples of poor data disposal, and what consequences are there for organizations or businesses?
So this isn't necessarily disposal. This is more of a retention issue, but you may be familiar with 23andMe, the DNA company. So they have collected a lot of information on individuals, a lot of sensitive information, and then they went bankrupt. And then all of the data that they held on to was up for sale as part of the bankruptcy. That's all that makes 23andMe valuable anymore. So if you gave your information to 23andMe thinking it was just 23andMe, your information, if you haven't had it deleted, might go to an entirely different organization that you would have never agreed to give your information to if you had known that they were involved with 23andMe at the beginning. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it's really scary.
It is really scary. So, there are cases where organizations have tried to use the de-identification method to say they've deleted the data, but it was really easy to put the information back together and figure out it wasn't just AK or MH, it was Ali Krings and Mark Heinley, because there were all kinds of other pieces of information. that doesn't satisfy the deletion or disposal requirement. It has to be so thorough that you can no longer tie the data back to an individual.
So how do organizations verify that they have completely and securely gotten rid of this information? I mean, is it just searching into Google really quick, doing a quick type, or what's the process like?
It can be a sort of Elasticsearch within an application. This is one of the areas that's caused organizations the biggest headache. If they didn't build their application with the ability to delete data at the beginning, not only do they have to figure out if they've deleted data, but they have to figure out how to delete data in the first place. And then you've asked a good question. There are tools out there. There's technological tools that will allow run scripts against an application and look for keywords, look for certain numbers. We know Social Security numbers have a consistent format. So it's 324. So you could do a search through your application and say, do we have any numbers that are in the 324 format? And that could be a Social Security number. And if so, is it within the retention period, or should we have already deleted this? And if so, why didn't it get deleted? There are also, you can talk about manual deletion versus automated deletion processes. So you can have tools or functions that are running every single day, because every single day you could have a group of individuals whose data is now past the expiration date. And so it should be de-identified or completely deleted. And those can run. And if they are unsuccessful, they can send an error message and say, hey, we tried, it was unsuccessful. Here's what happened. So you can do manual processes where you're just going in on your own and saying, depending on the volume, that's easier to do if an individual is making a request for deletion outside, their data hasn't reached the retention period, but they're done. You're not getting married anymore. You don't need any of that information. So even if they said, we're going to keep your data for 5 years, you want it to be deleted anyways. So that could be a manual processes, but there are tools that they can build in, functions, processes, so that it's automatically searching for, deleting the data, and providing you reports on whether the process has been successful or not.
So with this sensitive data that's out there, are there parameters that organizations need to be putting around that data and who has access to them?
Absolutely. So within the retention period, there are exceptions for it. And some, as a lawyer, one of the things that we deal with is called a litigation hold. And that's when someone is suing an organization, and the organization would say, hey, we need to protect and quarantine all of the information related to this individual in the lawsuit so that it doesn't get deleted or altered or even looked at by anyone except for people who are involved in the litigation. And so that is one of the most common exceptions for a data retention period. Is normally, data should be deleted at 1 year or 2 years, unless we flag it and we say, don't touch, huge consequences if we do. And then it has to be locked down and restricted so that it stays just the way that it was on the day that you knew that you were getting sued.
Fascinating. We're talking a lot about the data that we're giving to other people. I'm wondering if there's data that we need to talk about that we own. An example, if I go on my cell phone, I have so many photos that I've taken that has the information of the location that I took it at, or different text messages that I've sent, different emails. Is that data, as just a person, not somebody who works in cybersecurity, but as just a person, should I kind of set my own system of data retention, use, and destruction up?
There could be some really good benefits to that outside of the cybersecurity realm. just storage and access. When a photo gets buried, 30 years down, the likelihood that you'll see it and know it and enjoy it is less and less and less. So just from a practical, enjoying the data that you've collected, if it's a photo or a video or recording of some kind, there's good practices there, even if it's tough to do. There are, some security considerations as individuals. In a law enforcement action, our phones are going to be one of the first places, our laptops, our tablets, and anything that we have not deleted could be subject to investigation, whether that's fair or unfair, whether it's relevant or irrelevant. If it's gone, you don't have to worry about litigating over it or whether it's used against you. If it's there, there's at least the possibility. So there are some principles here that are useful for individuals to say, what, do I still need this? And if I do, what's a way that I should keep it that's more secure than just in my photo roll, or especially taking the picture of a receipt or something like that, might not be the most secure place. So you might need that receipt for later on. And maybe there's a way to set yourself up an annual data purge in your phone where you go through a spring cleaning. I'm going to get rid of everything that I don't need. Anything I do need, I'll put in an organized and secure location.
One of the goals with our cybersecurity mission is to help other businesses, organizations, people so that they do feel comfortable and confident in cybersecurity and in policy as well. So just for everybody who's listening, please know that we have a plethora of other podcast episodes online at KirkpatrickPrice.com/podcast. You're always welcome to go listen to other topics that may interest you. There's also an opportunity for you to ask questions. So if Mark's talking about something that you're like, ooh, I wish I could just pick his brain a little bit deeper on this topic, or I wonder how he feels about X, Y, or Z, I'd love for to invite you to go online and submit those questions, because of course we'll hop back on and we'll dive deeper into those. Mark, one of the things I did want to ask about, though, is, again, with that goal of wanting to help others, cybersecurity is a really important aspect of all businesses, all organizations, and it can often be a fairly costly endeavor as well. So maybe for some of those smaller organizations or businesses who are listening in today, what are steps that they can take that are cost effective, that are smart, just to set up for themselves a good policy for data use, retention, and destruction?
So, one of the interesting things about the topic of data retention, it's one of the few areas where if you practice it well and consistently, it is actually, it's a cost reducer. There's a cost to storing data. There's a cost to securing that data and monitoring that data and protecting that data. So the more that you keep, the more your expense grows. So any organization that has a we keep your data forever practice, I would encourage them to change that. One of the things that we used to experience in data privacy or regulatory laws was a data retention floor. You must keep data for 5 years or 7 years, healthcare records or financial records. Data privacy laws have gone the other direction. They've created a data retention ceiling. So you should only keep data as long as you need it. They don't give you a number. There are other laws, maybe industry specific, healthcare, financial, or environmental, where there might be a defined retention period. So that's a big shift from keep it at least this long, and then we don't care what happens, to only keep it for this long. And so as we're thinking about a privacy or data retention ceiling, you've got to be able to justify now how long you keep that data. So if you're a small organization and you're moving towards not keeping everything all the time because that's costly, think about a couple of factors when you're trying to figure out how long you need that data. Is there a law or a requirement from like a certifying body or a professional standards organization that says you have to keep the data for X number of years? As a CPA firm, we have data retention requirements as a CPA firm. So that helps guide our data retention practices. Outside of that, it could be a contractual requirement. Maybe your contracts with your clients require you to keep data for a certain amount of time during the business relationship, and then maybe even after the business relationship is over. So that could help clarify how long you should keep data. And then it could just be, how long does a process take? We've dealt with some organizations that help international money transfers, and there are very clear timeframes for their part in the process, and they know exactly what that's going to be. And so they can set their data retention standard to just beyond that, how long their part of the process takes. And they know that they won't cut anything short, but they also know they couldn't argue that they need to keep it longer, because everyone can see how long that process takes. So think about laws or standards, think about contracts, and just think about how long it takes you to do what you do. And that can help you set your retention schedule. And then if then you can start purging, and maybe you'll save some costs with AWS or Azure. Maybe you don't need as many tools as application tools if you start deleting data. So that's where I would start. Is if you're small, figure out how long do you actually need the data, and then move to the purging so that you're reducing your exposure for a breach and for litigation and for the kind of scenario 23andMe. If your organization were to be sold, do you want, is it going to look good from a customer perspective if you still have their data and now you're being bought by a company that's very different from the culture and values of your organization?
Yeah, I mean, it just sounds like the retaining information isn't necessarily a bad thing until you hold it without a purpose. Then you're just kind of opening up the doors for an attack.
Right. And even before you get to a breach, the French Data Protection Authority fined a property management company for keeping all of the documents of unsuccessful rental candidates in an active database for an indefinite period of time. So these weren't active renters. These were individuals or groups who were declined, but the property management company still had all of their records and were keeping it indefinitely. In that case, it seems pretty clear there wasn't a justification to keep unsuccessful candidates' records indefinitely. And so even though that organization didn't experience a breach, they had to pay a hefty fine to the French authority, while they were also having to pay to store all that data that they didn't need. And so, one of the clearest answers that you can walk away probably from this podcast is keeping something forever is probably the wrong data retention period. It's almost always going to be unsuccessful.
I love it. Well, Mark, I want to say thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us. Is there anything else that you want to add on before we jump off?
Sure. Maybe talk a little bit about data use and privacy, because I think this is one of the areas where, as you know, KirkpatrickPrice has historically been known as a cybersecurity company, and as there's more of a cybersecurity assurance industry than there is a privacy assurance industry, this is a topic that I think throws security professionals a little bit off. The premise of privacy, personal data use, is that you violate the privacy of an individual just by misusing their data. That doesn't mean it was necessarily breached or given to a third party that was unauthorized. It could mean an employee at an organization used very secure encrypted data. They just used it differently than the purpose for which they originally collected it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I like to think about it this way. If you had, if you were going to be working in your yard and you needed to get a bunch of mulch and you needed a truck for that, and you asked your neighbor to borrow their truck to go get the mulch and from the store and bring it back to your house, that truck is like personal data. It's something that belongs to somebody else. If you were to then say, you know what, I think I will take this truck down to the area where people jump trucks and ATVs off of dirt ramps, that seems like that would be fun. Or maybe a little bit less dramatic. Maybe I'll just take a little road trip. Nothing but a 3,000-mile road trip. The truck still is in your possession. but that's not, you didn't ask your neighbor for the truck to jump it off of a ramp or to take it on a 3,000-mile road trip. And they might have said no. They just lent it to you to get that mulch. So, nobody stole the truck, but just going off a ramp, just buying some, a soda and some snacks and hitting that road, that interstate would be a privacy violation, even if you were the one still in the truck, because that wasn't the purpose that you got the personal data for. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So
this one feels sneaky because people say, oh, well, this data wasn't accessed by a hacker, so we're okay. And it's like, but no, maybe somebody in customer support got access to all of the HR records of the employees. That's somebody within the company. That data might be secure, but if the customer support agent doesn't need access to those records as a part of their job, there's a privacy violation just by accessing the personal data for a purpose they didn't need it. Does that make sense?
Totally. So would an example of this be like, a lot of the times I'll be on somebody's website and it'll say, hey, subscribe to our newsletter. So I go ahead and I pop my email in. I'm all excited to get this news coming in monthly. But then they decide to use my email for maybe other purposes, like reaching out on a social media networking site or throwing me into a group. Would that qualify?
Absolutely. That's exactly what we're talking about. It's often marketing activities that are the other use and can get pretty costly. Last year in 2024, Commission fined LinkedIn 310 million euros for processing user data without proper consent. So they were using the data for behavioral analysis and targeted advertising. So it was data that they already had to provide the services on LinkedIn, but they started using it for different purposes than the user originally understood it was used for. So no third-party hack, no one stole it. It was just used for a different purpose, and that cost them 300 million euros, $335 million, because they didn't use it the way that they had promised they would use it when they collected it. Belgium fined an insurance company for using healthcare data for a purpose which the patient didn't explicitly agree to. You can imagine that there are many things when you're providing healthcare to someone, you might need to send them records about their treatment. Depending on what country you're in, you might need to send them a bill. And so lots of uses besides just the actual treatment. But this company was also using that personal data to train its employees and in video footage for physical security purposes. So it's important to train employees on healthcare practices, but you don't actually have to give them somebody's actual diagnosis and name and account number if they're not treating that patient. You can train them with fake healthcare data. And so they got fined something like 30,000 euros because they already had the data, but they were using it for improper purposes like employee training.
So a lot of the times you'll call in to schedule an appointment with your doctor, and before you actually get to the scheduling receptionist, it's like, the following message is going to be recorded. This may be used for internal and training purposes. Let's just say that, some big fancy celebrity is calling in and they're the ones making the scheduling appointment. Are they at fault for replaying that video to say, hey, listen to this? It was the Queen who was calling in. Is that an example?
That's a huge misuse. Yeah. Celebrities and their healthcare and celebrities and their financial records at like a bank are prime scenarios where an employee who could access the data without having to breach anything, but has they're not treating the Queen, but they're like, I could sell the Queen's medical records, or I could just look at it and tell my neighbors for a good story, and maybe nobody else knows, but that is a privacy violation. That is her data. When it's healthcare data, it's even more special and sensitive. If it was a child, it's even more special and sensitive. Okay. So privacy laws and principles are, you have to tell people why you're collecting their data. They agree to it, and then you only use it You only use the truck to transport the mulch to and from Lowe's. You don't use it to go jumping ramps. You don't use it to take your friends on a 3,000-mile road trip. You just use it for the purpose that you collected it, because that's their truck. One way that companies can pretty quickly know what are permitted uses, not 100%, but on their privacy policy, you'll see it. We're collecting your data, and here's how we're going to use it. And they'll list off bullet points like, we're going to use this to provide you the good of the services. We might use this for fraud detection or information security or the performance of our website. And so that's kind of their boundaries, is what did they tell you they would use the information for when they collected it? And then they can check and say, are we using this data for anything other than this list of uses that we mentioned? And if we are, then we could be in trouble.
So what about when you're applying for a job and it'll say, here to be the cashier, your duties may include backstocking. It's going to be ringing up customers. It'll be greeting at the front door. It's collecting carts. And then there's always that line that's like, and other duties as assigned. Do companies ever have that kind of blanket of and other areas as we see fit?
Yes, they used to. It's I'm glad you asked that question. In my notes I had data privacy requires specific transparency and specific consent. I'm consenting to you collecting my healthcare information to provide me with healthcare services. I'm not consenting to you providing you my healthcare data to train your employees. I'm not okay with that. I'm okay with one, but not the other. And on some websites, especially in Europe, it's more common. You'll see these preference centers where there's multiple buttons. Do I want to subscribe to their newsletter? Yes or no. Do I want to be a frequent shopper or a rewards program? Do I want them to send me notifications about affiliated organizations that are owned by this grocery store or whatever? So you've got all these different options. Do I want to be contacted by email, by text, by phone, by regular mail? And so they split up all of the uses and all of the responses to make it very clear, what are you agreeing to? And then they can map that and say, okay, Allie says she wants all the coupons and she wants the newsletter, but she doesn't want us sending anything to our, the other subsidiaries that we own just for this organization. And then you can know if you got spam from one of those subsidiaries, maybe they're not keeping their promise. They might have shared your data in violation of what you agreed.
And now all of a sudden, I feel like I've got to dig through my email and make sure that my data is staying where I wanted it to be.
We should. There are inconvenient consequences to when organizations misuse our data, and then there can be very significant life-changing scenarios when they use our data in ways that aren't appropriate. When they use our data to create a new or a different product. You and I going back and forth before this, AI now creates a whole different level of exposure. The use of AI is something that should be specifically consented to. I think there's still kind of the Wild West, and so using AI to say, hey, take all this data and tell us what product we should sell to these individuals could get more than inconvenient. It could get problematic. Another way of misusing data is, let's say you gave an organization your data voluntarily, but then they went and collected your data from public sources, and they didn't tell you that they collected it from public sources. That's actually a misuse of data unless they, give you a heads up within a certain amount of time and say, hey, Allie, we've also collected this data about you. If you're applying for a job or you're applying for a mortgage, that can have a significant impact on whether you get the job or whether you get the loan. And if that data is inaccurate or needs some context, and you don't have the chance to provide feedback on it, it could cause significant problems if they don't let you know they're going to be collecting your data that way.
Wow. I love it. Mark, what else is on your mind?
The last one I'll say is, so I think there's some obvious ways you can misuse data. we sell widgets, and we know that we could make money if we sold the list of our customers to Facebook or Instagram. That's a pretty obvious use. But like we talked about, a new product or a service might be a little less obvious. Collecting data publicly, even less obvious. And probably, here's the last one, something called international data transfers. So if you're in certain parts of the world where there are heavy data protection regulations, like in the EU, and data is going to be sent from inside the EU to another country that doesn't provide those same data protection safeguards, that could be a misuse of your personal data. Because what happens in a different country, it could be subject to surveillance like it is in the US. So there's a need to tell people when you're collecting their data, is it going to stay here or is it going to be traveling abroad? And if so, where? And if so, how will you protect the data if that location doesn't have the same safeguards that we have in this country? So those might not seem like misuses of data, but they are, and that they can cause and already have caused, sanctions and complaints and all kinds of problems.
As a lawyer, and somebody who has specialized in this, you must walk around with just like red flags popping up here and there, seeing a lot of issues. What's something that you see pretty regularly that maybe people don't realize is a misuse of that data?
I don't know if I could say it's an outright misuse, but I know that when I travel to the airport and my photo is taken during the security process, and there are some airports apparently that have posted photos, hey, so-and-so is traveling through, as a way to promote tourism in their airport. I have a problem with that. I'm only consenting to that picture being taken just so I can board my plane. I'm not, unless they're going to pay me, and then I'll consider being a social media influencer for them. But travel is an area where your data is collected in so many ways, where you're going, where your luggage is going, where you've been, and if you travel internationally, that just expands. So there are times, I think, for those in the data privacy world, lawyers or not, where you kind of have to say, there's only a certain extent to which I can deal with the concern I have for the appropriate and ethical collection and use of my data. And then there's times where it's just a consequence of living in a world where information is, like oil and water. It's what makes the world go round.
It's been really interesting because in the summertime, and I'm based in Minnesota. For everyone who is just joining us, but in the summertime here, there's a lot of garage sales, and I absolutely love, walking in, finding treasure among somebody else's, ready to pass on. But one thing I've really been noticing this year is a lot of people are like, cash only. We're not going to do the Venmo. We're not going to do card. Well, you might be doing card at like a concession stand, but is that a way just to protect your own data, to actually take out cash and use cash instead of your card everywhere that you go?
Yeah, I mean, there is a little bit of a trend back to physical goods and currency. It's a related but slightly off topic, but there's a big pushback against subscription, for movies and video games and music. You no longer own it. If you just buy the digital version, it can be removed at the whim of the streaming provider. So buying a record or a CD or a DVD, and we might find ourselves going back to VHS at some point, paying cash, traveler's checks. Those used to be a thing, and advertised when you were going to go on a trip, you could use traveler's checks. There is in a heavily politicized world, spending money and transferring money, and who monitors that and who owns that and who that gets shared with seems like a simple thing for a friendly Minnesota garage sale, and it could turn into something much more unpleasant that you could never imagine, just because of all the dots that are connected, because someone didn't have a good retention policy and someone didn't dispose of data like they should have.
Wow. It's so interesting, Mark. I want to say thank you so much for sitting down and breaking down data use, retention, and disposal, giving us some ideas, making it really relatable and easy to understand. I hope that we get the chance to pick your brain again. I hope that you will be a friend of our cybersecurity mission.
Absolutely. We'll do it again, and we'll get you excited about another data privacy topic.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. I hope you have a wonderful day. For everybody else who's still listening, make sure you go online to kirkpatrickprice.com/podcast. That's where you're able to check in on other episodes that we have available. You can submit questions. So if you have a comment about maybe some of Mark's thoughts, or if you have a question, or maybe totally unrelated to data use, retention, and disposal, there's another topic within cybersecurity that you want us to dive into, we'd be happy to do so. But for now, my name is Allie Krings. I'll catch you guys again soon.
When you work with a Kirkpatrick Price cybersecurity auditor, you work with someone who's been in your shoes. Let's see what the next expert is ready to share to support you in your cybersecurity mission.
Hey everybody, my name is Stephen Collins and I am an information security auditor here with Kirkpatrick Price. I've been working for the company for about 3.5 years now, and I've been doing IT and cybersecurity for about 20 years. My favorite topic to talk about is physical security. I really love it because there's so many disparate controls that you get to look at and that all kind of come together to really protect everything that we do, protect your people, protect all of your data and assets. I have a CISSP, I have a CISA, a CISM, I am a QSA, and I also have a master's degree in cybersecurity. I really love helping people with cybersecurity compliance and information because it's such a difficult subject and it's something that changes so rapidly that people really need to have that expert and that friend that can sit them down and explain to them in kind of basic words about what it is that all of these different controls are, what they mean, and then how to implement them and how I'm going to look at them when I come in to try and help somebody.
If you want to prepare for success with regulatory compliance, visit kirkpatrickprice.com/podcast or the show notes to download today's episode resources. We're here to empower you to face your cybersecurity and compliance challenges. Are you ready to join a community of 10,000 people who are working together to elevate the standards for cybersecurity and compliance? It's free to sign up at kirkpatrickprice.com/podcast or check the show notes and achieve greater levels of assurance today. Thanks for joining us on our cybersecurity mission.